Before we get started with our chat, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items here on the next slide. I wanted to let you know that we have muted all of your lines to reduce the background noise, and we want you to be able to still be able to move around in your environment while listening to this live chat. But if you have questions, we certainly want you to type those in, and there is a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you have any questions, please type them in as you think of them. And I already see that we have some questions in our chat box, so thanks to those who've submitted their questions right away. That's great. And you don't have to worry about taking any notes today because we're going to email you the link to the recording of today's live Alzheimer's chat. And also we will send a link to all of the resources that we'll cover at the end of today's chat. So be expecting that email later today. All right, with that, I want to welcome our guest presenter, Sue Paul. Sue is an occupational therapist who has spent the last 25 years immersed in the care of older adults. She has paid close attention to how human beings age and how diseases take hold and how to mitigate the decline of independence. She also specializes in aging in place, neurological and orthopedic rehabilitation, environmental design, and Alzheimer's disease. She's affectionately known as the Dementia Queen, and Sue has spent the majority of her career focused on training others on how to best rehabilitate and habilitate someone with dementia. Sue is a renowned speaker on aging and dementia and is also an Alzheimer's Association ambassador to her local congressman. She is the author of her blog, The Dementia Queen, and part owner of a rehabilitation company called Baker Rehab Group. And with that, I welcome Sue to this quarter's Alzheimer's Live Chat. Thanks so much, Sue, for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are covering a somewhat difficult topic, driving. I know that I get questions about this all the time, and I'm sure you do as well. We kind of chatted earlier. It's not an easy topic to broach because there's not a cookie cutter answer for every question. Driving situations are different with every person, and you know, each situation is so different and unique that sometimes it's hard to know what is best to do. So hopefully throughout today's live chat, you can give us some insight into maybe the situations you face with your clients and just provide some advice to our listeners.
Certainly, yes. It's a very, very challenging topic for sure.
Yeah, well, I see that we have some questions coming in, so please keep those coming, everyone. I am getting those, so I will be going through them. If we don't get to all the questions in our hour, please don't be discouraged. We kind of put them in our question bank, and we might be able to address them in a later session or in the email newsletters. So I think Judy submitted a question specific to driving, so I wanted to start with that one first. And Judy says, my husband's doctor has told him that he is not to be driving. He's refusing to do this because he still has a license in hand and swears he will not stop until the day they take his license away. She says she's been to the motor vehicle branch and has written the superintendent of motor vehicles as directed by them, but nothing has come of it. They fight constantly about his driving, and she says his driving's okay, but on his bad days it makes her very nervous. And she's brought it up again to her husband's doctor, and he says that they've notified the motor vehicle branch with another letter. And she says, is there anything else that she can do? Sue, do you have any additional advice for her? It sounds like she's kind of on the right path at least.
Yeah, she's doing everything she can do, I think. Every motor vehicle association branch has an advisory board, some sort of medical advisory board. So if you had epilepsy or some medical condition that warranted the motor vehicle association knowing about that, there is a board that you can contact. And the way it works in Maryland anyways, the board would mandate him to get a driver safety evaluation, and there'd be a time to it, a deadline. And if he didn't do it by that time, then his license would be revoked. The doctor can also, initiate that sort of chain of events, again, through the MVA. So I'm surprised that I don't know if she's just not getting to the right person at the MVA, because there should be. My advice would be to look for a medical advisory board. I think that's what it's kind of a standard term, medical advisory board with the MVA, and see what they can do to try to facilitate that. The doctor can also, I don't know what their relationship is, but encourage the driver safety evaluation, and just get some objective feedback. If he'd be open to, saying, she could even say, I'll back off if you pass the test. Simple as that. You go get the driving assessment done, and if you pass, then great, you pass, and I'll get off your back about it. But that's the best way to go, because then he's a willing participant versus being mandated to do it. But I guess that's really all I can suggest. He doesn't really recognize that there's a problem, and that's pretty common. And then, you add into it a family dynamic, and just an argument can ensue pretty quickly. So I feel for her in this case. And it's very, very common, though, so she's not alone. Does that help?
Yeah. Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone is helpful. A lot of times as a family caregiver, you can feel so isolated in what you're going through. So I hope that Judy is encouraged that she's not alone. And I really like the advice that you gave. I didn't know that there was usually a medical advisory board at the local motor vehicle association. So that is really good to know. And also, I think you recommended something great, to take that decision off of the family member. You said go get a driving test and let the experts determine whether or not you're okay to drive. So I think in a lot of situations, the caregiver feels the burden of taking away the keys or something of that sort. And if you can put that almost, I don't want to say blame, but kind of put that blame on another person, a medical
an outsider, sure,
that can be extremely helpful. So
sure, there's a big sigh of relief when you offer to be the bad guy.
Yes.
I'll let them know. It's a big. It does help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have another question submitted by Robin. She asks, is there some kind of electronic tracking device that can be put in the car, or that my dad can have in his pocket, that allows me to track where he is? So far, he does not drive any place that he doesn't know how to get to, but I'm nervous that at some point he will get lost in the car. And she said, FYI, he no longer has a cell phone since he stopped using it 6 months ago. She says, thanks for any help you can provide.
Oh, gosh. I wish I had this question ahead of time. I think that there is. The technology out there is booming, because this also relates to teenage driving as well, because parents want to keep tabs on where the kids go. So there is. I wish I could tell you right now what that is. I'd be happy to research it and get the information out there. There is some way to do it. I wish I could tell you exactly how.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some sort of GPS tracking device that you could have in the car that maybe connects to a cell phone app. We'll, how about this, Sue? Let's do some research on our end, and then when we send out the follow-up email, we can include a link to that in there. How does that
That would be fantastic, yeah, because I'd love to be able to help with that, or help you that information out there, because that's huge. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. We have, somebody has said, Lauren, she added that there is a resource, Beyond Driving with Dignity, at keepingusasafe.org. So that might be a resource that Robin can check out in addition to other resources. So I always like to share when people share resources with us, because that can be helpful for other people. Okay. Here's another question from Brenda. She says, what is the value of tinted front windows or blue headlights seen on some vehicles when driving under very sunny or dusk to nighttime travel? And she might be asking this. I hear a lot from the seniors that I work with that, at night or in certain weather conditions, a senior might feel a little more unsafe driving. So do you have any experience with that, Sue, or any additional advice, or are you able to answer Brenda's question?
I can only speak to the changing vision in an older adult and the problem they have with glare.
Oh, yeah.
There's different eye conditions as you age, maybe cataracts, maybe glaucoma, things that change the trajectory of light. So there's different shades of lens color, for example, that's helpful. So maybe rose-colored sunglasses versus gray versus, the smoky gray versus a bluer tint. And it's kind of a personal preference which one mitigates the effect of the glare. So that might have something to do with it. Like if you're an oncoming headlight seems to very dispersed, like that light is very what's the word? Refracting very in a big diameter versus a little pinpoint of a headlight. Sometimes a different color lens can help diffuse that light a little bit better. So that could be part of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is helpful. I know that sometimes the headlights these days are so bright when you're driving at night, it can almost be blinding. So yeah, if there is some sort of tint out there, and I was reading something about these different eye conditions and how they can affect your driving. And would you agree, Sue, that if your loved one is developing some sort of eye disease, that it would be good to talk with the doctor about how that could affect driving and kind of do a little bit of research around that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Brenda. I hope we helped in answering that question. Steve wrote in and he said there's 2 products out there that I have used in nursing homes that I've worked with that help know where they're driving. One is called Automatic Smart Car Driving, so Automatic Smart Car Driving, and the other is called Zubie, Z-U-B-I-E, Key. So he said that has been a benefit, and then he says you can, both of those products, they plug into a diagnostic port that connects to your smartphone. So that might be a good option. Yeah, so again, Zubie Key, Z-U-B-I-E, Key, and then the Automatic Smart Car Driving. Those are 2 options. So thanks, Steve, for writing in with those suggestions. That's awesome. All right. Okay, Charlene wrote in, and this might be a common situation. I know I've heard of similar ones. She said, my mother does not agree she has dementia. Her license was taken away by the doctor 8 months ago. Any ideas on how to diffuse her anger about this? We use avoidance techniques, but she gets really angry about the whole issue.
Yes, this is a huge common problem. There's basically I don't think there's really any winning this argument. She was independent in driving, and she feels that for no good reason it was taken from her. So, validating that, throughout this whole issue, I'll say the word validating quite a lot probably, but, it's really recognizing that, yeah, you have really lost something here, and I'm sorry. Because, there's no way you can't do anything about it. You can't rescind on your decision. She's not going to necessarily see the dementia. She's not going to agree with you because that's part of the disease process is the lack of insight and awareness of actually what the deficits are. So, proving it to her, trying to show her, like, you see how you didn't remember that appointment, over and over again, showing, trying to just show her the truth that she's not thinking as clearly as she should, doesn't necessarily work. So it's really just validating and apologizing and redirecting and, whatever alternatives to transportation you can offer that, can be helpful. Like, of course, some other family member always needs to drive, but that it's fun for them to drive. Like, I enjoy driving you around and, I need you as my co-pilot or, just giving them some other role in the whole experience too. It's just a tough, it's hard to get a warm fuzzy from, someone who's had their freedom taken away, It's not really a great feeling.
I like that advice that you gave. Include them in the driving experience in a different way. Yeah, I like how you said make them the co-pilot or maybe they're in charge of the radio station, something like that. Maybe something that gives them back a little bit of the control factor that driving provided them their whole life. And I think
Mhm.
that that's why it's such a hard topic is we we most of us have been driving since we were 16, 17 years old. So
Exactly.
I can only imagine how frustrating it would be to have that privilege taken away. I know when I've worked with families on this driving issue, um, I've talked to them about creating a plan. So if it's not an immediate danger to themselves or to others on the road, try to talk through ways that they can slowly stop driving or cut back on driving. Maybe, I mean, my own grandma, she said, I don't really feel that comfortable driving at night. So whenever we have family get-togethers, we always go pick grandma up. We make sure that there's
Mhm.
somebody that can provide a ride for her. Or I've talked to other people. Somebody mentioned that their dad really only goes to places that they know how to get to or places nearby. So sometimes that kind of an approach can be helpful in slowly cutting back on those driving responsibilities.
Sure. That's a great point, Lakelyn, because something I forgot to mention about the driver safety evaluation. If an occupational therapist, for example, does it, it's not necessarily an all or nothing decision that comes out of that evaluation. There are recommendations for restricted driving, which still gives them some privilege. So it might be that the therapist recommends that they only drive during the day and they only drive within a 5-mile radius of their home. Because for the most part, a lot of these people just do the same thing every day. They go to the same store, the same hairdresser, they go to the same church, the same bank, and pretty much their world is within that 5-mile
Yep.
radius. And so it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing, which can also help diffuse the conversation. Let's go have a driving evaluation. It doesn't mean all or nothing. So there can still be, like you said, just a kind of a tapering down of the driving independence to just a place where everybody feels a little more comfortable. That's a great point that I forgot to mention.
Well, and Homestead recently had a public education program about the topic of driving, and there's a lot of great conversation starters. It's called Let's Talk About Driving, and so you can find it at let'stalkaboutdriving.com. And I'm going to share that link at the end, but sometimes it's just getting started with the conversation, and people don't know necessarily how to start talking about driving with their aging loved one. So let'stalkaboutdriving.com has some suggested conversation starters. And one of the ones I really like is to ask the senior, so how's your driving been lately? How do you feel about driving these days, mom or dad? And in many situations, the family was surprised by the answers because sometimes the senior will admit, oh, I really don't feel that comfortable driving at night, or, I've been driving myself to the doctor, but it's down a busy street. Would you mind taking me the next time? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be as simple as just asking them how they feel about their driving in some situations. So again,
yeah.
those
Sometimes it is self-limiting. Sometimes it definitely is self-limiting. They realize their own limitations and their own comfort zone, and maybe just knowing what are the alternatives in case I want to stop doing this. Then it is an easier conversation later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have another kind of tricky question here. Chris writes in, my father's license is revoked, and he doesn't care if he has a license or not. He says he will drive anyway. What's the best way to remove his keys from his home? Do we do it when he's not there? Any advice there, Sue? That's tough.
Ugh. Yeah. This is one of those, if I have my professional hat on, I should say this, and if it was my own father, I would, it's tricky. I'll just share with you what others do that I've heard. People have dismantled the car. People have dismantled the car before. They've, taken it off the battery or, somehow disabled the car. They've hidden the car, take the car away, but and they lie saying it got impounded or it's broken, it's at the shop or something, some deceit that goes along with it. And then, or you just, take the keys away. And I can't speak to any of those things being right or wrong, or, people are in situations that I can't judge because it's not my situation. The unfortunate thing about dementia is that, caregivers are forced to deceive sometimes, and it's not the way they want to go at all. They'd rather have a rational conversation and everybody's in agreement it just doesn't go that way. So when you're trying to keep, others safe and the loved ones safe, you have to make these tough decisions. So what's the best way? I can't speak to that. I don't know what the best way is. Because if you can't do it rationally, then irrational is never great. It's just, there's probably some sort of deceit involved, which is, unfortunate.
Yeah, I was talking to my coworker about this, and with her grandma, they did, every time someone went over to the house, they took the keys. And so her grandma kept thinking that she lost her keys. And so finally she came to her own conclusion that if I can't keep track of my keys, then I probably shouldn't be driving. But she didn't know that the family had been taking the keys the whole time. So you're right.
Oh, exactly.
Deception is needed, and is it right or is it wrong? It's so hard to make those determinations. And in this case, it sounds like the family did the right thing, maybe in contacting the DMV or the local doctor or his doctor about getting the license revoked. But
there is some liability to consider if it gives you a little more courage to do something, drastic. If the license has been revoked and there is an accident, I think the implications could be much different. The liability associated with it, and because you're not going to probably have insurance that would cover an unlicensed driver. So I just think that's something to consider. Nobody wants anybody to get hurt, but there's an additional layer of problems down the road if something terrible did happen.
Yeah.
So.
And Sue, do you think in any case, if it gets to such an extreme, would calling the local authorities be an option for families? Of course, you'd always want to probably avoid that, but maybe in this case, if his license is revoked and if he's really unsafe on the road.
The thing is, I think a lot of police departments are putting programs and systems in place to deal with, cognitively impaired older adults, because they run into this all the time. So I think that a lot of departments have at least one resource officer dedicated to this kind of an issue. And maybe if you can become friendly with them versus you're not like calling 911 on this. You're looking for a resource and an ally. And if you need an officer to have a stern conversation or, to be part of the ruse that scares them into not driving anymore. So, I think there's a way to engage police officers in a way that's not necessarily 911, an emergency, but just to get their help with the situation. I think that there's a lot of officers that would gladly do that.
That's a good point. Thanks for sharing that. Somebody, Brenda, she has shared that most senior centers hold the AARP driver module every 2 years. This reevaluation allows us to apply it to car insurance credits. And then they go on to ask, will this be sufficient testing as we age past 75 and are still capable drivers?
I'm not sure, honestly, what the...
I haven't heard of that program before.
Yeah.
I know that the AARP online has some good literature on driving as you age. I know that in my state of Nebraska, I don't believe that there is any mandated testing. I know there's been some specific state-related questions that we're getting in, and unfortunately, Sue and I, we ourselves live in different states, but it's hard because we're not familiar with all 50 states to specifically address state by state these types of questions and what their regulations are. But Sue, do you have suggestions on if they want to find out this information, where would be the best place to look for it, do you think?
For driving evaluation?
Yeah, driving evaluations and information on the state's requirements, that sort of thing.
The MVA, they always have a list of who the drivers are that they use, that they recommend. And remember that it's the driver evaluator isn't making the decision. They're only making the recommendation. The decision actually comes from the MVA. I think AAA might have a list of driving evaluation sources. The MVA definitely does. AOTA, which is the American Occupational Therapy Association, has a list of certified driving specialists that are in different areas. The best place to start is probably at the MBA.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
So, Sue, you're an occupational therapist, and so I know in a lot of cases people will go to, a driver rehabilitation clinic to be evaluated by an occupational therapist, or will go through some sort of testing. Can you just, speaking from your own experience, what kind of things do those driving tests entail?
Well, usually there's a clinical test, and then there's a behind the wheel test. The clinical test will be like a vision test. It's just related to kind of driving skills, that what visual requirements are for that. There's a reaction time test, how quickly you can respond to a stimulus. And then there's some paper and pencil cognitive tests. And those tests look at things like attention and something called divided attention, meaning can you pay attention to two things at once, or can you alternate between two things? Because that's really a practical driving skill. Can your attention span go from your speedometer to the school bus in front of you, to the oncoming traffic, to the light that's changing? You have to shift your attention around. So those tests, that first component, they call it the clinical assessment piece, that determines whether you go on even to the behind the wheel test. Because if you fail that, then there's really no point in getting behind the wheel. So then the behind the wheel piece is really the driving performance. You get in the car and you drive around and you see how they respond to, just how they behave on the road, basically. Okay. And some combination of all those results the recommendation will come then. Well, are we recommending that they don't drive anymore? Are we recommending, sometimes we softly say, well, it's time to retire from driving. It softens the blow a little bit. Or some kind of restriction. I recommend you drive just during the day in your area, avoid high traffic times and things like that. Does that help?
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, if families are going to be looking into this for their loved ones, sometimes it's helpful to kind of know the process, so then the family member can explain to their loved one, okay, these are the steps that they're going to take. And so thank you for sharing that. I know we have a local driver rehabilitation kind of a clinic, and they were set up at a little trade show, and they had the reaction time test so that we could all test our reaction time. And it was two little pedals, and there was a red light and a green light. And so when it turned red, you had to stomp on the pedal. And so that's one of their reaction time tests. So I thought that was it was fun to experience that, so I could better understand the different things that they do during those driving type tests. So there's also a resource that I came upon lately. It's called the Car Fit program.
CarFit.
You can find it on carfit.org. Have you heard of that before, Sue?
Yes, I have, actually.
I thought it was neat because, as seniors age, they give some tips on how you can make adjustments in your car to help them drive better. But I know so sometimes people have some physical limitations that come with age. Obviously, these aren't specific to cognitive impairment, but I thought that was kind of an interesting program that I had run across lately. So, all right, well, it looks like we're starting to get a few questions outside of the realm of driving. Sue, are you okay addressing those types of questions? We have some good.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so the first one is submitted by Debbie, and she says, my mother-in-law becomes rude when I try to help her. I know it frustrates her to have help. Is it okay to ask her to please not be rude and just say thank you? That's a good question.
I know that, and I feel for her because this is also common. And family dynamics are tough. You have to remember that they just are. I think Debbie's better off. This is my personal opinion. Validating the frustration. Like, I understand why you are so frustrated with this. I understand you don't like help, and then you got to take the lumps that come with it. And the reason I say that is because Alzheimer's and dementia, they're brain diseases. And if you could change the brain disease and it was brain cancer and she was lashing out, would you respond differently? Would you be more inclined to let it slide because she has this brain disease? And that, and I know it takes thick skin, and I know it's not easy day in, day out to have to take those lumps. But I always try to encourage, like, the person with the brain disease wins the argument. And sometimes you might get your apology and sometimes you won't. That being said, though, there are stages of Alzheimer's, if it's truly Alzheimer's and they're kind of progressing in a predictable fashion, where social expectations and social norms are kind of forgotten, and that's when the inhibitions come out, and a little more impulsive speech, and things they wouldn't have normally said, and things like that might happen. And it's okay to remind somebody of a normal social standard, like I can't give you an example in this related to Debbie, because I know this is just a one-on-one thing. In this particular situation, I would probably not embarrass the mother or the mother-in-law or put her on the spot for how she's behaving, because she's dealing with a lot of things. If it's in a larger social context and you want to just like speak on her behalf, well, we thank you very much for your time, if there was something else, another situation. But in this case, I think it's just best to validate and redirect and move on.
That's a good suggestion. I know that so much of what comes along with caregiving is having to kind of almost, no, I don't want to say suck it up and just kind of go along with it. But unfortunately, in this disease, you're right. There's, in a lot of cases, we talked about this early, normal reason and logic a lot of times isn't there. So in the case of driving, they might be getting really upset and angry because they think you took away their driving privileges. In this case, they're getting upset because you're helping, and they actually need the help. They don't think they need the help. So it is really, really tough. I think you gave some really good advice there. So thanks so much for that, Sue.
Sure.
I know we were just talking about the different stages of dementia. Christine wrote in and she said, my mother is 90 years old and in the late stages of Alzheimer's. She can no longer speak or stand. However, has a good appetite, but gives her mostly soft foods or food cut into small pieces. Although I realize she's in the late stages of Alzheimer's, I know that she understands everything I say to her, and she's aware of what's going on around her, and she knows who we all are. She'll respond to things I say by nodding her head and will touch my head when I hold her or lay my head on her lap. I feel like she's right there if only I could somehow reach inside her. Is this normal for someone in the late stages of Alzheimer's? Am I being unrealistic thinking that she's right there? I'm having a very difficult time coming to terms with the thought of losing her. Oh, that's such a hard question.
Yeah, it is. That's touching. And what stood out to me is the word normal. Is that normal for somebody in the late stages of Alzheimer's? Because, as we all know, there's nothing normal kind of about the progression of Alzheimer's. I've always said that late stage Alzheimer's is about moments. There's moments of clarity. There's moments of connection. I think her daughter is much more in a much better position to know if she knows her or not, or if she's right there or not. I'm not the person to answer that question, if it's unrealistic or not. She's the one who would know. I think that it's easier to access or have that human connection when highly familiar people are tapping into highly familiar feelings. So a bond between a mother and daughter can be very highly familiar, especially if it's the same head and the same hair she's been stroking for years. If it's the same voices. Sometimes I think everybody kind of is aware that the newer memories are the ones that fade first, and the long-term memories are the ones that last. So it's not uncommon for people with Alzheimer's to remember their childhood better than they remember their adulthood. So that sense of human connection, they might even feel like they're the child in the relationship because they remember their parents better. So some kind of nurturing interaction like that, they really might feel more, it might be more familiar that they're the child in that instance, and that they're being cared for by an adult, by a parent. But that's just muddy water, and it's not really here nor there. It's kind of just, accessing somebody in a moment. And I think that that's beautiful. And I think she needs some encouragement that she's doing everything really, really great. I mean, she's there for her, and paying attention to all these little nuances. And I think that's wonderful. I wish everyone had caregivers that were that caring. My heart feels for her.
Yeah, Christine is not alone in that situation.
Not at all.
I've heard of similar situations, but it is just so touching the way that she speaks so fondly of her mom, and that she can feel that she's there. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind when you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's is that they are still someone. They're
absolutely, yeah.
They're still a person. So I think that Christine is doing everything right, and I don't think it's unrealistic for her to think that she's not there, because in Alzheimer's disease, in my experience, there's good days and bad days, and some days she might feel more there than others. So I think that I liked what you said about those familiar feelings, kind of those nurturing feelings. I like the way you phrased that those are kind of the things that are most familiar to people, because they've been nurtured since they were babies. So
it's instinctual.
Yeah, that's a neat.
So another point, Lakelyn, if you want me to elaborate a little bit more on this stage, because I have such a sweet story about this, but there's a tendency as the disease progresses for the visual field to shrink. And the visual field isn't what people can see, it's what they can attend to. So like you and I right now are looking, maybe we're looking straight ahead, but we have this really broad peripheral vision, and we can attend to something that moves off to the side, or, we're kind of aware of our surroundings. As the disease progresses, though, that field narrows to directly in front of the person, and then it gets shorter, closer and closer and closer. And I'm not really, like I said, I'm not talking about visual acuity, it's just visual attention. So really at those late stages of the disease, they're really only attending to something that's right in front of their face. So you have to bring the world to them. It's, they can't attend to the person across the room who's reading the newspaper out loud, or playing bingo, or, here's your cake and balloons, and it's across the room. It doesn't have as much meaning, and it's hard to attend to unless it's directly in front of them. So I had this lovely couple. This man was in a nursing home, and he'd been there for several years, and the wife came every single day, and she bathed him, she dressed him, and she put him, in his wheelchair, and he had a tie on every day. His hair was combed, he was shaven, and he was in the very late stages, and she took just such beautiful care of him. She picked on him like a mama monkey, a mama ape, just preening him. And then, so I'd come in to see her, and she'd be standing next to him, and she'd still be petting him and saying, he just doesn't know me anymore. And I said, have you ever stood like directly in front of him and got right in his visual field? And she said, and she's all over him. She goes, well, I'm here all the time, and I'm constantly touching him. I said, just get right in front of his face. So she did that, and almost nose to nose, smiled, this big, broad smile of recognition, which she had not been able to see. Despite the fact she's there day in, day out, she finally had this moment of connection with him because he finally saw her. And it was tears all around the room. It was just such a beautiful thing. And it was fleeting, the smile lasted, it was just such a beautiful thing. So I think that visual field is a powerful tool for anybody in the late stages. Just try to bring the world to them and right up in their face, and see if you can get a better moment, a better connection.
Oh, that's a neat tip, and such a neat story. I like that. Thank you so much for sharing. That made me smile. I liked that story a lot.
It was a great moment.
And we actually have a question about focus, so this ties in really perfectly, actually. Cynthia wrote in and said, my mother seems not to be able to focus on anything for any length of time. She just rolls around the nursing home in her wheelchair. I wish she could do an activity. Do you have any suggestions? So, in this case, she might have that somewhat narrow field of focus that you just talked about. So any suggestions as far as activities that you can do with somebody that has Alzheimer's that might be more, it sounds like her mom might be in the later stages if she's not focusing as much, or maybe you can speak better to that, Sue.
Yeah, it's funny that I think sometimes this is harder on the caregiver than on the actual patient sometimes who's going through this, because they're rolling around, and it might seem purposeless to the observer, like, I wish I could engage her in something, but that is actually the activity she's choosing to do. And, it's just like wandering. It's wandering in a chair, basically. But, she's exploring the world. She's moving around, and she's telling you by doing that she prefers gross motor movement, and she wants to be on the move. And those are two great tricks right there. To put her at a table and ask her to focus on something just probably isn't what she's seeking to do. So I would take that cue and maybe, engage her in gross motor activities. And those things would be things like what she's already doing is rolling around, but rocking and swinging and marching and dancing in some cases. Just maybe a balloon batting activity where she's really reaching and using her arms, because that seems to be what she's interested in doing. If she seems fidgety, like her hands don't have anything to do that, or she's hoarding or rummaging through things, then there's a great tip right there. You follow that lead. Okay, she likes to use her hands. So what can I give her in her hands that would be meaningful? And sometimes you don't need to overthink it. It's not about what's meaningful to you, it's what's meaningful to them. So I actually have like rummage boxes, and they're just boxes of like a shoebox with random items in it. So like a screwdriver, a flashlight, a paintbrush, a bottle of nail polish, a key, just random objects. And you let them go through them. They don't need to be their own personal item, but it's just a familiar item. And you watch the way they grasp it. And if they grasp it in some meaningful way, like they hold the flashlight like a flashlight, and they hold the paintbrush like a paintbrush, or a pen like a pen, I mean, that they know what the object is, because they're telling you with their hands that they recognize it, which is a very valuable tool, because sometimes because they can't say the word, you might think they don't know what it is. But if they show you with their hands they know what it is, then that's a lot of information for you. So I wouldn't worry about a real structured activity unless there's something that she leads you that she wants to do. Sometimes a ball of yarn is fun. You unwind it and you wind it back up. It keeps your hands busy. If someone's a little more high level and they are having trouble attending a task, rather than putting something together or constructing something, I call it deconstructing, which is just taking something apart, which is what kids love to do. I mean, they'd rather tear something apart than put it back together. And because it requires a lot more cognitive function to assemble something. So if you have something that they can just, take apart or knock down or put away versus having to make it neat and orderly, just breaking something down sometimes is easier. So that's another suggestion I might have. How was that? Does that help?
I love that. That's great. Yeah, I like how you talk about kind of cluing into what they're doing, and then make kind of meaningful activities from that. Or instead of, because I think sometimes as a caregiver, you hear so often, it's important to engage them in activities, and activities to someone maybe with a quote unquote normal functioning brain might be far more complicated than an activity someone maybe in the later stages of dementia. So sometimes it can be so simple, and a lot of times we try to overthink it and overcomplicate it. So I like that you broke it down into some.
Well, and I think wandering it's nothing more than exploration, and I think exploration is a much better word than wandering, because wandering makes it sound purposeless. But what do you do when you're trying to think about something? If you have something on your mind, and you start doing something, like maybe you start cleaning the bathroom, or you go for a walk, or you drive somewhere. I mean, you're just trying to work out some thoughts by movement, and that's just common human behavior. So we try so hard that there's somebody wandering, and we think that's the worst thing in the world. Like, oh, no, you can't wander. Don't go, sit down here and be still, or do this guided project where I don't want to do that. I need to think this through, or think this out, or just go explore. And I want to give the world meaning by touching it, because I don't have the words for it anymore. So let me feel it with my hands and let it make sense to me. So it's just a different way of looking at wandering, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. For years we've tried to correct that behavior where it's actually not a bad thing at all. Like, we all do it. It's normal.
Yeah, I like that. Especially if they're in a safe environment, let them wander, I say.
Yeah.
Well, we have another question that's somewhat related to kind of the activities that we've been talking about. And Allison asks, could I ask how to encourage a relative aunt with Alzheimer's to come out with us for lunch during our visits to see her. She's recently gone to live in a care home. She's in her 70s and is probably in the intermediate stage. She can become angry and unresponsive, not wanting much to eat, even by the care workers in her home, and stays in her room, um, nor wanting to mix with the other residents. Thank you for any advice in this matter. So any
Okay,
advice for Allison's family?
This is a multifaceted question, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like. Yeah, when I was reading it, I was like, wow, there's like 5 questions in this one. So I'll let you take it away, Sue.
Let's deconstruct this. Okay, so the aunt just moves into a new place. So there's like the first issue probably. She doesn't want to be there. The second issue is that she doesn't want to socialize with the other residents. And there's another issue is that she doesn't eat. So what are some reasons that could be happening? Well, depression is the one that stands out to me the most because it's common, in older adults. It's common in as the frontal lobe of the brain starts to deteriorate a little bit, and you get just a depression mood. And then also you have she's lost her home, she's in a new environment, and those things aren't just depressing themselves, they are. Then maybe and the symptoms of depression would be withdrawal and it may be a change in appetite. So that does stand out to me. I would consult with a doctor about that, and also just give it some time because sometimes there's a couple of months of adjusting to a new environment before before that can kind of alleviate. And also, I think a big thing in a new environment is learning. If the person can learn who they can trust and who they can go to for help, alleviates a lot of that anxiety and depression because they have an ally. If they're not alone, if they know, what do I do if I meet somebody and they have a person, that also helps with it a lot. Another thing though, like with the so what if she has pre-existing social preferences? Like, did she ever like to eat with a bunch of people or mingle with a lot of people? Did she have a lot of friends? Did she prefer to be alone? Was she introverted? If those are that's sort of her standard who she is, then I would just meet her in that place. Like, that's kind of what she prefers. So it's not hurting anything. I wouldn't necessarily try to change that. And then this is a kind of a newer area of interest to me, but I think it's very huge. It's called, just like sensory processing changes. Is she avoiding sensory experiences because they're uncomfortable? So does she avoid loud noises and bright lights? Is she sensitive to certain food textures or certain smells? Is the whole busyness of the environment kind of noxious? And that can cause somebody just to want to retreat from that. And that sounds like sensory avoiding. It's like, and I think that's just an interesting topic. So my advice there would be to start bland and add in. So, if you can take the cues from her environment. If she likes the blinds down, the curtains drawn and it's kind of dark and it's very hot in the room, and, she just doesn't like a lot of sensory things, then I would just start small. Can you open the blinds a little bit, let some light in, start with some bland foods, maybe some soft music or neutral noises, and just keep those stim and don't push her to go out and socialize or be in a busy environment. Maybe offer a sweet food and just kind of move it slowly, progress it. And if you can get her outside, I think that's like one of the best environments for all 3 of those issues, for the depression, for social preferences, and for sensory processing, because being outside, it does lift your mood. You can be alone, but you're still in an environment that's like, it's vast and it's interesting and there's plenty of sensory information and stimulation, but it's familiar. You know what a tree is and you know what cars look like, and so it's not that unsettling to be outdoors. But it's still stimulating. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a mouthful, but I guess my advice is to, just kind of meet her where she's at in this whole thing. I would talk to the doctor about depression first, but I would kind of meet her where she is and just kind of go slowly from there. You don't need to, you'll be so much better if you come out with us to this Italian restaurant and we, have messy food and loud music and, or a loud birthday party or something. Like, just start slowly and introduce her back into a busier environment slowly. So that's what I would do.
Suggestion. Yeah, I think those are all great suggestions, and something that as caregivers we need to keep in mind is that as the disease changes, we need to meet them where they are, and it's hard to try to force them to be one way or another, or try to force them to be who they were. I heard one of my colleagues was telling me a story about how he always took his dad to a baseball game every summer. They went routinely, and even through the early stages of dementia, they would still go to the baseball games, and his dad just loved it. And the last time that they went, there was a change. Being in the crowd of people walking in and out of the stadium, his dad just kind of shut down, and he didn't, when it got really loud and they cheered, he tensed up. So he noticed that his dad, while baseball was something he always loved, because of the disease, these kind of like what you were talking about, the noise and the people and just all the stimulus was kind of overloading. So from that point forward, they watched the games at home and tried to make it kind of a baseball environment. They got the hot dogs and the peanuts, but it was a quieter environment. And his dad was still able to engage in the activity. It was just modified to meet him where he was in that stage of the disease. So I like how you gave that advice to Allison, and I hope that that helps her aunt and the family, help her, the aunt, adapt to the new living situation. So great question. I think we might have time for one more. And let's see here. We have one coming in. Maria writes, what can I do about our banking? My husband is, of course, joint on all of our accounts, and since his diagnosis, I've told the local tellers to call me if he tries to withdraw more than a reasonable amount, as we are struggling now daily with where he puts and spends or even loses his cash money. So my question is, what do I do with our banking? Is there a way to obligate the bank to avoid us issuing him large sums without notifying me? Is that legal? Would it break? It would break my heart to take away his freedom to go into the bank and take out money, but I'm worried about all of this lost cash. That's tough.
Oh gosh, I see this a lot too. There's some at the local branch level you can get a friend. There are some really great bank managers out there who know this problem, and they get to know the families, and they can't institute like top-down regulatory changes around this. I mean, they're banks, and they're federally insured institutions, and they really can't bend the rules legally. But they will put in place certain limits to how much you can withdraw, and they can, make it like a debit account that has a cap on it. And he might have to consent to some of those things, I guess, depending on if he's listed as on the account. But I think a lot of the banks are getting familiar with this problem, and they're putting systems in place to help manage it. A simple suggestion might be maybe they only give him $1 bills or small bills, so that he doesn't have like a wad of 20s. He only has a wad of ones. Because a wad of ones feels like a lot of money. Your wallet feels pretty full. And then also at home, I mean, because I've seen people that, they hide the money and then they don't know where it went, but getting him a lockbox that he can, and training him, and by training I mean it's repetitive for 3 months. It's not like you quit after a couple of days. Opening the thing, putting the money in, and shutting it and locking it and putting the key somewhere. It takes a while to get that system down. But if he has control of that money, then he might stop going to the bank so much.
That's a good point.
And then, so, I don't know. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I know I encountered a similar situation where the individual is going to the bank all the time, and it is a difficult situation. But I know in this situation that it was the local teller that contacted the son to notify the son about the frequent trips to the bank. So it is. I think you're right in suggesting that this family, Maria, goes to the bank and talks to someone. And I think as our population sees more and more people with Alzheimer's and dementia, local businesses, whether it's banking or restaurants or all sorts of places where these seniors are frequenting, they're going to start seeing more and more of their customers with Alzheimer's disease. So I think it's so important that everyone be educated on it, especially in those environments where people are frequenting often. And it sounds like banks are going to be, you mentioned that a lot of more and more local banks are seeing this problem come about. So I think that you made an excellent suggestion there. And I know Home and Sid recently came out with Alzheimer's friendly businesses, a whole campaign around that, where we can come out and do an hour-long training on that. And I think that we've seen some really good feedback and results. And local restaurants are some of them, if it's kind of a mom and pop restaurant, are coming up with more simple menus with pictures. And so little adaptions like that can make a big difference. And so suggesting to Maria that she makes a friend at the local bank. And I really like your lockbox suggestion. I think that that's another great option. I think that that will help them kind of navigate this difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, and I did want to share the resources slide with you, and thanks to everyone for submitting such wonderful questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. There was a few that we weren't able to answer, but the resources on here, we have the helpforalzheimersfamily.com as well as confidencetocare.com. That has both sites have a lot of great tips and advice. If you want to follow our Facebook page, Remember for Alzheimer's, the link is there. You can also sign up for the newsletter. It's sent out several times a week with, sometimes it's uplifting videos or the latest and greatest research or different apps, things like that out there for caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. And then I mentioned let'stalkaboutdriving.com. There's the website there. And then if you want to learn more about Sue and her practice and follow her blog, thedementiaqueen.com. That web address is there. And thanks again, Sue, for joining us today. I know that you offered some really great advice. I learned a lot about driving and about the different stages of Alzheimer's and activities that you can do with loved ones. So again, thank you for joining us. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And of course, of course. And stay tuned for the next live chat, which will be coming in September. We do this quarterly, so there's going to be a 3-month break in between, but in September we'll send out the link as it gets closer with the date and time. But in the meantime, if you have any questions that either we didn't get answered today or if you think of them down the road, please email us at livechat@homeinstead.com, and we'll try to address them next time. So again, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.